Hi everyone, welcome to The Wheel of Mind, a character point of view reread podcast dedicated to Robert Jordan's The Wheel of Time series. This season, we've been taking a deep dive into Moiraine's point of view, and this is our final Moiraine episode. I'm Lajar Dane of the White Ajah.
And I'm Giskel Cimaris, a scholar from Ilion. Now, I do want to give you a quick spoiler warning, and this is the only spoiler warning. We will use material from any of the 15 books in this podcast, so if you've not read the entire series, we urge you to do so before listening to this podcast. Now, today we're here to discuss Chapter 16 and Chapter 49 from A Memory of Light, and other Moiraine highlights from that, and possibly a few other books.
Since last time we ended things with Moiraine's letter to Rand, that she left him for him to read after her falling through the doorway, tackling Lanfear, I thought we would kick things off with her letter to Tom, because that's the next piece of information that drives her story forward. So that comes from Knife of Dreams, Chapter 10, A Village in Shiota. My dearest Tom, there are many words I would like to write to you, words from my heart, but I put this off because I knew that I must, and now there is little time. There are many things I cannot tell you, lest I bring disaster. But what I can, I will. Heed carefully what I say. In a short while I will go down to the docks, and there I will confront Lanfear. How can I know that? The secret belongs to others. Suffice it that I know, and let that foreknowledge stand as proof for the rest of what I say. When you receive this, you will be told that I am dead. All will believe it. I am not dead, and it may be that I shall live to my appointed years. It also may be that you and Mat Cauthon and another, a man I do not know, will try to rescue me. May, I say, because it may be that you will not or cannot, or because Mat may refuse. He does not hold me in the affection you seem to, and he has his reasons which he no doubt thinks are good. If you try, it must be only you and Mat and one other. More will mean death for all. Fewer will mean death for all. Even if you come only with Mat and one other, death also may come. I have seen you try and die, one or two or all three. I have seen myself die in the attempt. I have seen all of us live and die as captives. Should you decide to make the attempt anyway, young Mat knows the way to find me. Yet you must not show him this letter until he asks about it. That is of the utmost importance. He must know nothing that is in this letter until he asks. Events must play out in certain ways, whatever the costs. If you see Lan again, tell him that all of this is for the best. His destiny follows a different path from mine. I wish him all happiness with Nynaeve. A final point. Remember what you know about the game of snakes and foxes. Remember and heed. It is time, and I must do what must be done. May the light illumine you and give you joy, my dearest Tom, whether or not we ever see one another again. Moiraine.
And I know that's not a Moiraine point of view, but in a sense it is, since she wrote the letter. That's literally in her words.
Yeah.
And again, that makes her sacrifice all the more poignant. Now, from what we understand, the world of the snakes and foxes, the elfin and illfin, time runs a little differently, and we don't know exactly how. And that's one thing that would make this even scarier. Would she be there longer in that time than she would be in real time? Would she be there less time? We don't know. So to me, just those things, and the very real possibility of the failure if people try to rescue her, makes her sacrifice that much more poignant in the knowing of it, the stepping right into it. And that letter it's one of those things. I was overjoyed when I first read it, reading through the series, and it kind of made me sick at heart at the same time.
Mm-hmm. One thing that was most frustrating was not really this letter itself, but the fact that in the entire next book, this mission is barely mentioned, and we don't actually get to it. I assumed it would be like they would go during Knife of Dreams, and then we get the Gathering Storm, this massive tome, and it doesn't even come up. She's barely even mentioned in the book. And so it's not until really towards the end, in the chapter numbers are in the 50s, until we have the Moiraine rescue mission in Towers of Midnight. And I found that so difficult to hang on for the first time through.
Yeah, it's like you tease us with this letter, and then you just drop us and leave us for a while, and it's a long while for the reader.
So there's not a ton about Moiraine's character or anything, but I just think seeing some of her last words, so to speak, before we pick back up with seeing her in person was a good thing to go over. This was more about Matt's character, I guess, because all of the stuff about the rescue mission is from his point of view. So he was just shocked when he read this letter. He gets to the words, "Dearest Tom," and he's like, "Tom, I don't think I should be reading this here. I think this is too personal." And he was just shocked. He's like, Moiraine would address anybody as dearest whoever? That doesn't seem like her. And then later, after the rescue mission, he actually sees them openly talk about their attraction for each other, and he's just completely blown away. But we'll get to that in a moment, because I've taken some notes on the rescue mission. So Mat, Tom, and Noel finally figure out where they're supposed to be going, and they get to the Tower of Genji. They use some clues that Mat and Oliver had put together, mostly stuff that they heard from Brigitte. They break all the rules that you're supposed to follow when you go into this world. So they brought musical instruments, means of making fire, and iron weapons. They found Moiraine. She's clothed only in a fine mist that burns when you try to touch it. And she's wearing that darkened ivory bracelet that we last saw her ripping off of Lanfear's wrist before she tackled her through the doorway. Tom picks her up, despite the damage to himself, and covers her in his Gleeman's cloak. Mat bargains with the eelfin, who are the foxes, to get her back, realizing how much she sacrificed for Rand, Perrin himself, and the fate of the world. And so thinking about how much she has given and how important she is to the fate of the world, he finally realizes what it means and willingly gives up half the light of the world to save the world, meaning that he sacrificed his left eye. But he didn't make a bargain with the Aelfin, the snakes, who then start coming after them. So Noel reveals himself as Jane Farstrider at this point, and he sacrifices himself to hold off the Aelfin at a narrow pass, atoning for his betrayal of Malkier all those years ago. Mat cuts a hole in the wall using his Ashendari, realizing it was the way out granted by the Eelfin, or the foxes, the last time he visited them from Rodion. The crew escapes, coming out of where they entered around the Tower of Genji. We elapse a little bit of time, and when Moiraine has regained consciousness, she explains what happened in there. The Eelfin and the Aelfin both delight in consuming human emotion and experiences, and it seems like they really like the one power too. So they drained her channeling ability and fed on her distress about losing her channeling ability as well. They also told her that they killed Lanfear by draining her too quickly, but she's skeptical of that story, thinking it was maybe just a scare tactic. She also recounted that there was a man there once, and he said that she was not the one he was looking for. Moiraine got 3 demands from the Eelfin, as is usual, because she actually went through the doorway, so that's sort of the conditions under which you make agreements with them. And she included that ivory-darkened bracelet on Grial as one of the things she got to demand from them, but she won't tell us what the other 2 were. The problem with that is the bracelet gave them even more power to feed from, and so they were able to kind of keep siphoning that from her slowly. Without the Angreal, her access to Sidar is greatly diminished to the point where she probably couldn't even be raised to accepted in the tower, but with it, her power is greater than her original unaided capacity was. Mat thinks that Moiraine has come through this experience changed in other ways. She seems humbled and shows far more emotion than she used to, including fear, sadness, and tenderness. And he thinks that this makes her seem stronger somehow instead of weaker, despite the fact that she used to seem so placid and calm all the time. To Mat's shock, she then asks Tom to marry her, and he agrees. They say that he just wasn't paying attention if he didn't notice their fondness for each other before. Skeptical first-time readers wonder if the authors made this up as they went along, like late seasons of Lost and Game of Thrones, or whether there really were any clues. They then vow to reread and find out. And then the crew's next mission is to go and find Rand. That was at least my reaction, was like, definitely have to reread this series the first time I got there. Are you sure?
Yes, and I'm sorry, I just really have nothing to add to that. It's one of those things that, is so pivotal, because not only is this something to save Moiraine, but she has to be there at the end. I don't know how much of that she realized when she sacrificed herself, but again, you have the cup full of despair and a teaspoon of hope. That's what they're given here. Mat at least realizes how critical she is. She has to be there at the end. So he makes his sacrifice, they go on. I don't know, it's just such a redeeming thing to me, because from the time that she, quote unquote, died, my first time reading it, it was well over 10 years before I get to where she's rescued.
Ooh, yeah.
So, and that was just for me as a reader, because I waited till the entire series was finished, and then waited a couple of more years before I started it and went through start to finish. So I really didn't know. And so this is pivotal to me, and as well as being pivotal and important to the story itself, because she has to be there at the end for Rand to do all the right things. So, just a great part of the story. And I thought it was really weird that Noel turns out to be Jane Farstrider, but you just kind of go with it. It's there. By the time you find out, you can't do anything with that. So
No, that's a good point. You don't have time to process it, or like you said, do anything with it. He did drop hints a lot of the time, especially in this book. A lot of his dialogue was like, wow, I never saw anything like this, and my cousin Jane didn't either. Wow, I've never done anything like this before.
I missed a lot of that on the first time through. So.
Oh yeah. I find it interesting that she seems stronger to Mat now that she's so cast down, is one of the words that he uses to describe it. I mean, she always seemed just strong to me anyway. That's something we've been talking about this whole season, is just her sort of iron will to do what needs to be done. But I guess this shows that being kind of softened and humanized is something that can make you more powerful. Maybe people would be more likely to trust you or something. I don't know if really that's why Mat reads her as stronger. What do you think about that?
Yeah, in my mind, it does take more to show emotion, to have emotion, to admit that, and go forward, with what has to be done anyway, rather than being someone who, though, feels the full range of emotions, keeps all that inside and shows a calm serenity at all times, appears unshakable, almost robot-like, if you would. It takes more strength to channel and control the visible emotions than it does to just bottle them up, in other words.
I think so.
I think it makes her seem stronger because it makes her seem more human, less, superwoman that you can't really relate with.
Being able to demonstrate some degree of vulnerability can make you more credible in a lot of cases. Probably easier to empathize with and that kind of thing as well. That's really all I could glean from that. There wasn't a whole lot, again, about her character development or anything, or much from her perspective throughout most of these last few books. There's very little in the way of POV, but I wanted to give some context of where we are in the story, just because where we left off last time, she was charging through the doorway, so quite a bit kind of has to get us caught up here. I have a few other pieces to give us some context before chapter 16. In chapter 5, Rand has gathered all of the leaders of nations and Egwene, who's by now the Amyrlin. He gathers them all together to reveal his plans for the Dragon's Peace. He has 3 requirements: that the current national borders are fixed and nobody can go to war. And this is all kind of still wrapped up in the same point. Nations are obligated to come to the defense of any that do get attacked. Number 2, the Amyrlin will give official custody of the seals to Rand so that he may break them. He actually already has the seals in his possession, but he wants that kind of formal public declaration. And then 3, Rand himself will have full command of all the armies in the last battle, because they really will need to be against these massive hordes of Shadowspawn and Dreadlords. Also, Rand's current plan at the time is to extort the reluctant leaders into signing this document and ultimately to kill the Dark One. And that's when Moiraine walks in through the door or walks into this meeting at the very end of the chapter. She ends up in the next chapter quoting prophecy at everybody to get them to understand that they will and must keep the peace to balance the breaking of the last age. Additionally, everybody realizes there's some stuff missing from this treaty, so the Shan-Chan must be made to sign it. Rand claims that he's going to get them to, although he doesn't mention he has no idea how to do that at this point. The Aiel also feel demeaned at not being included, so they get written in as enforcers of the peace. Moiraine insists that Egwene, instead of Rand, must be the one to break the seals, and that Rand shouldn't actually be the leader of the unified forces because he's going to have to go into Shale Ghul and be off the grid. Nobody's going to be able to contact him, so they already know at this point that's what they're going to have to do. So Rand hands that honor of commanding the forces to Elaine instead. Rand then takes Moiraine aside and says that we need to go help out a friend. So they go to Lan's command tent in Shinar, where they're fighting Taim and his dreadlords. Moiraine argues against it. She's saying you're going to expose yourself too much. You're also going to, it's too risky. You're going to use up a lot of your strength that you need for the actual last battle against the Dark One of Shayol Ghul. You really need to spare yourself. So Rand tries battling the Dreadlords, and he realizes he could win, but just like Moiraine said, she was right. He could only do so by exhausting himself too much to have any energy left to win at Shayol Ghul later.
Chapter 16 has a couple of point of views before it gets to Moraine's. The first one is Loyal's point of view, as he and the other Ogier enter into a ferocious battle against the Shadowspawn. Then we switch to Rand's point of view, where he's in a command tent. Moiraine pulls him into a conversation and reminiscing about how frustrating Rand has always been to her, or used to be to her. He begins thinking about Kalendor, which is, of course, a sangreal with no safety features, one built to channel both the one power and the true power, but has a secret to it. And as he's thinking about this, Moiraine engages him in conversation again, accuses him of hiding and deflecting questions. So he gives Moiraine a direct answer. I'm going to kill the Dark One. And of course this sparks a debate, and after debating the possibilities of doing that task, Moiraine asks him nicely to fetch her some tea. Rand almost does it without thinking, and then he stops, and Moiraine asks him again, what are your plans for now? He tells how he plans to go to Ibu Dar and visit with Mat and try to gain the support of the Seanchan to get them to sign on to the Dragon's Peace and fight alongside the armies in the last battle. Then we finally switch to Moraine's point of view. Here we see how Moiraine muses on how Rand was a true ruler of so much, and how he had grown so much into that role, and yet was still humble, or had this mixture of self-effacement and pride. And she says this phrase that she said many times, the wheel weaves as the wheel wheels. And she drinks her cup of tea, thinking how it tastes wonderful. It's completely clear of the Dark One's shadow, which is, of course, is over most everything else in the land at that time, and wished that the weaving of the wheel were easier to understand.
Complete triviality, but I've always loved in this series that people drink tea even during the worst of times when they're out camping and stuff. They've always got to have their tea. And so I love that it's such a part of the setting here in this chapter. I guess it's probably symbolic somehow that he's willing to defer to her and actually really listen to her advice in ways that he never was before, because before she went through the doorway, last time we checked in on their relationship, she was having to serve him because she had given that oath.
Which, by the way, did that oath ever end? Perhaps he no longer held her to it. I haven't thought of that. It just now hit me. But
yeah, well, since she gave it under the oath rod, she can't speak a word that's untrue, so she should still be bound to him through the one power. But I believe now that he is Zen Rand after his veins of gold moment of kind of integrating himself with Lews Therin, he's not going to ask that of her in that way anymore.
Right. No, it's pretty obvious. And when she, first says, "Well, I do want a cup of tea," and he starts to head that way, and then stops. It's kind of grins, and they talk back and forth. And he gives this quote to her. He says, "Thank you for your advice, now and always. I don't believe I've said that enough. I owe you a debt, Moiraine." Well, she said, "I'm still in need of a cup of tea." So, and he goes and fixes it for her. And because of, like you said, the Zen Rand, the way he's found balance, the way he's counteracting the Dark One, when he makes the tea, it doesn't taste of mold and rot, the way everything else in the land tastes right now because of the Dark One. The way he has these grand plans of, I'm not just going to seal him up again. I'm going to kill him. I'm going to end the Dark One. He has these grand plans, which he's made grand plans before, and he's done things that, as he said in one of the quotes there, I didn't give it out, but he's done the impossible before, and what's one more impossible task? But the difference is this time he's willing to share it. This time he is willing to talk about it. He's willing to open up to her. And this banter, and as you said, back and forth with the thing about the tea is kind of part of that banter. It's them, or maybe him, realizing how much he's able to relax and open up to her now where he wouldn't before. And I know he wishes he had, especially seeing just how far she was willing to go. in order to save him and to save the world. And I suppose that is one good point in having most of the actors for the show with a British accent right now. Since they are all focused on tea until we get to the
Yes.
Chan with their coffee. But yeah, you might as well, even though the book never describes them with a British accent. I think that's just kind of the thing to do because of the Lord of the Rings, the Game of Thrones, Carnival Row. It just kind of falls into the genre. You've got to have a British accent to do high fantasy.
I think you covered everything really thoroughly in this chapter. I really, really enjoy this moment. I like that he's finally humble enough to admit that he needed her guidance all along. And it takes a lot of humility and vulnerability to be able to thank somebody, because you're acknowledging that, you couldn't have done it without them. And so far he was protecting himself from, I guess, being vulnerable with people in that way for a very long time until his veins of gold moment.
Yes. And it's one of the things that people do in general is when they are brusque, when they are rude, when they are self-centered, oftentimes it is just they don't want to open themselves up so they could be hurt.
Yeah.
Because if you don't open yourself up, you can't be injured, at least not very deeply, and thirdly, emotionally, you can't be injured deeply. But here, he's showing this willingness, and why not? He knows that he's not going to walk away from this battle alive. Either he dies and destroys the world, or he dies and saves part of the world. But that's your choices, Both are bad choices. So why not go ahead and be more vulnerable? Why not go ahead and break down those walls? Why not go ahead and reach out and give somebody the chance to hurt you, just so they also have the chance to help you and be close to you. And we need that closeness. Everyone does.
Yeah.
And we see here, even Rand does. Even the Dragon Reborn is human. And we've seen that. We've kind of seen those walls break down earlier. Of course, he's been very bitter over losing the hand. And through Tam's sparring, Tam kind of gets him to just relax, learn to use what you've got. And he, I think Tam even says it's been heavy carrying around that hand you lost. I think was the words he used. And so, Rand has been going through this process of kind of laying down the heaviness, the not the weight of responsibility, but the weight of trying to be strong. And now it's okay for him to be vulnerable to the right people in the right places. And I like his character more as he does that, as he grows and develops and gets closer to the end. I like his character more and more.
He has finally realized what perhaps the readers might have come to realize at this point, that he needs a whole ensemble behind him to win this. If you were to describe the basic plot elements of The Wheel of Time to somebody who hadn't read it, they might think, well, that sounds really trite. Just this hero that's on the light side battling against some dark evil side.
Right.
He thinks that that's what he needs to be, that he has to put it all on himself, and he puts so much pressure on himself. And there are people around willing to relieve that pressure. Like we saw in, I think, our last episode, Moiraine said, I'm on your side. I'm fighting for you.
Right.
Egwene said that she was, and he hears all of people's voices telling him while he's battling the Dark One that they get to be heroes too. It's not just him.
Again, he could not do this without, Moiraine and Nynaeve. He couldn't do it without Moradin.
Yeah.
And he couldn't do it without Elaine leading the armies, Egwene leading the White Tower, and so many of these people giving such sacrifices, thousands of people dying. But they had to give the sacrifices, because if he had tried to shortcut things, just go straight to Sheol Gul and let's, bypass this last battle thing, none of it would have worked. It wasn't about Rand being the hero and sacrificing. It's about Rand facing the Dark One, while everyone who stands in the light stands up and does their best to be a hero. And whether it's a big sacrifice, a small sacrifice, everybody gives something.
Moiraine is certainly one of those key players. That's what we talked about this entire season, is how, he absolutely couldn't have done it without her. And I think it was nice that how Mat realizes that even. Mat's not a terribly deeply thoughtful person. He tends to be kind of impulsive and think in the moment. And we don't see where Mat has been contemplating that and laying it out. But in the moment, he realizes, yeah, I do have to do this. She's done so much for the rest of us, even when we were probably not easy to work with.
Right.
And he, in that split second, realizes what she's done for all of them and is willing to give up an eye, which is horrible pain, right? Oh,
Right.
for her, and he realizes how crucial that must be for the rest of the world. And so now I think it's a good time to segue into the ending of the story and talk about Moiraine's role in it. So she only has a sprinkling of appearances that culminate in her final, just tiny couple of paragraphs of a point of view in chapter 49. So during the last battle, while everyone else, all the forces of this new Dragon's Peace Alliance, and then you have people like the White Cloaks and the Shanshan and the Aiel as well, are out on the field fighting Shadowspawn. Moiraine, Nynaeve, and Tom have accompanied Rand to Shale Ghul to the entrance to the Pit of Doom for the more covert mission of fighting the Dark One directly. Tom guards the entrance while Nynaeve and Moiraine actually go inside the cavern with him, and it's the same cavern we've seen the Forsaken walk into. Normally, there's a pit of lava in there, but they get there and actually see that it's empty, and the Dark One says that these fires have been consumed already. So they decide when they get in there that Nynaeve and Moiraine are going to form a circle with Rand. And when you form a circle linking channelers together, you can kind of give one of them leadership of it. So they form this circle and allow Rand to have leadership of it so that he can use Kalendor to boost his channeling capacity, and so that he has access, as you mentioned earlier, to all of the powers. So he will have Saidin through himself and also through Kalendor. He will be able to channel Saidar from the women and the true power from Kalendor. Kalendor's fatal flaw is that not only does it not have these safeguards against channeling too much power, but it has this secret such that somebody can actually wrest the control away from you. So it's kind of a trap in that way. So that's all we've done so far, is just set this up. The chapter ends with Moiraine gasping when we hear an all caps voice that I assumed was the Dark One, basically saying, let's get this started. But I've seen some people say it might also have been the creator. So the voice said, "It is time. Let the task be undertaken." It seems like it's not just in Rand's head, so Moiraine gasps because she hears this as well. I assumed that this was the Dark One, but the wiki said that was the creator, but I don't know that there's any evidence for that here, or if that must have come from an interview question that was answered or something. Do you have any thoughts about the all caps voice here?
I'm like you. I had always thought of that as being the Dark One, but now that now that someone's brought that up, it does sound more like the creator.
It could be, since Rand is the avatar for the light and kind of embodying the creator's energy in a way.
Yeah, because that the chapter ends with Rand was not surprised. He had heard this voice once before, and he realized that he had been expecting it, hoping for it at least. "Thank you," Rand whispered, and stepped forward into the Dark One's realm, leaving the footprints of blood behind. So yeah, if he's thanking him, I don't think it is the Dark One. He's not accepting the Dark One's invitation. He's going forth, I think, with the blessings of the Creator. I had never thought of that. That's awesome.
I hadn't either, but totally, yeah, not my idea. I got that from the wiki, but your reading of that completely confirms it, I think, for me. Moiraine didn't do a whole lot of anything unique in this chapter, so that was in chapter 23. And then the next little snippet we see of it, I think, is in chapter 47. We see a couple of other snippets of this fight, but not with anything significant happening from Moiraine's point of view. So Moradin is in there. Also in this setup where the pit of lava used to be, there's just this blackness, and they're kind of treating that as where the Dark One is, although Moiraine does remind them when they first go into this cavern that the Dark One's not physically here. This is not physically the boar or his prison. This is just a place where he can touch the world. So he's in some other kind of spiritual realm instead. But he's somehow embodied by this nothingness that's behind Moradin. So Moradin and Rand start sword fighting. At one point, they freeze for a while. Rand is going through all these kind of simulations in his head. He's going through this world where he defeated the Dark One and killed him entirely. There's a reality where the Dark One won. So he's seeing how the world would play out and understanding what he needs to do. But while this is happening, I think his foot hits this darkness, and he falters in the fight, and he drops Kalendor. And so Moradin picks it up And now they're terrified that Moradin's going to have all this power and be able to win. But because of its flaw, and because of the fact that Nynaeve and Moiraine are linked to Rand and Callandor through this circle, they're able to still wrest the power of Callandor away from Moradin. So even though he's physically holding it, Rand is able to channel all three of the powers into this blackness behind Moradin. So he's able to channel both saidin and saidar, and it describes it as like gloved in the true power, which is the Dark One's own power. So as he reaches into this darkness, there's not the potential for a counterstroke. He can't fight back and taint either of the halves of the one power. And then we get to chapter 49. Because of Nynaeve and Moiraine's help here, Rand is able to braid saidin and saidar together and create a new prison for the Dark One after the seals have been broken and all the kind of debris of that patch in the bore cleared away. He weaves a new prison, and from the outside this looks like a burst of blinding light, and we see it from Moiraine's perspective. They have to run out of here right away, so Moiraine grabs Nynaeve and runs out of the cavern, but she's literally blinded by this light, and so she almost just falls off of the mountainside. Tom catches her, and she drops Nynaeve to the ground before the two of them could have gone tumbling down. And Moiraine looks inside the cavern, even though it's still blindingly bright in there. She just can't look away, and she sees this kind of glow that's consuming both Rand and Moradin. And then that blackness they saw in the pit, she sees it shrink and shrink and shrink until it's just this pinprick that then disappears. That is the end of the last battle from the Shale Ghoul perspective.
Climactic ending, yes. And Moiraine had to be there. Again, had it not been she and Nynaeve, I don't think Rand could have allowed anybody else to be in a circle to have any amount of control over him. He didn't trust anyone else enough, except, of course, maybe Elaine and Avienda, but they had their other jobs they had to be doing.
Right, if they didn't need to be elsewhere. Yeah, and maybe at one point earlier in their lives, Egwene he might have, but I don't even think he would have trusted her at this point because they were so at odds about the seals and everything, because she's more so the Amerlin seat now than she is herself from Emond's Field. And so, those were the only two eligible Aes Sedai that he could have trusted to do that. And it also helps that they're extremely powerful.
Well, Nynaeve especially. Moiraine more, I would say have the control and things that Nynaeve might have lacked, but the refinement and use of the power. And at the end, when he's channeling all three, basically, and he says he wasn't even doing it in weaves anymore, just the pure raw power, just pouring it in there, forming a new prison or fixing the seal, however it was just, no longer was there, he was not using earth, fire, spirit, and all these things. It's just, just shaping it to his will, just directly, which I think is pretty cool. And that'll lead to another discussion perhaps later other thoughts I've had about this. But yeah, just a great climactic ending. In a way, I was a little bit let down because I had liked the idea of him destroying the Dark One until you get, Rand's vision of basically that doesn't fix things. Evil is already out in the world, so there will always be evil. You're never going to bring back a utopia in doing that. One of the paths he saw where he really wouldn't win, not the way he wanted to. It had been talked about how the seals that Lews Therin and the 100 companions had placed, were imperfect because they weren't the creator. They couldn't build the perfect prison the way the creator did. Yet here we see Rand, but I guess that may be one of the things, since the creator actually spoke to him at this point. He's an instrument of the creator, so the creator is creating the new prison again, but he's using Rand to do it. So, you kind of have to do these mental gymnastics, because they kept saying earlier in the book, well, nobody can make it perfect like that because only the creator can. But here we see it exactly what needs to happen. So, yeah, I would just say at that point he's a conduit or an agent of the creator, and he's doing it, under the auspices of. Especially since you brought that out about the voice, that kills me. I never caught that before.
I think that really does complete that thought for sure. Because when Lews Therin, launched his assault on the Dark One, he not only did he not have the blessing of the creator like Rand has now, he didn't even have the blessing of, half of the Aes Sedai at the time. None of the women were behind him, and so that's why it was doomed to fail eventually anyway, and also why Saidin only was tainted, of course. But Rand, yeah, he's got this endorsement of the creator, which Lews Therin didn't have, and I suppose he's sort of working at that point as an avatar for him, because he's able to do things now that don't really make sense in terms of just Saidin anymore. Ever since he came down from the mountaintop, grass just springing up greener behind him at his feet, and apples growing, in that orchard and stuff like that. He's already, I think, just kind of exuding this, the creator's influence on the pattern. So it's almost like the opposite of these bubbles of evil, like miasma type influence has been causing everything to rot and stuff like this, bubbling up from the dark one. I don't know where else we exactly see the creator's kind of influence on the pattern other than through Rand as this conduit, like you said.
In fact, it's been one of the elements of the stories. You don't really see the creator, and I had never caught on the fact that we heard him until you brought that up here in this podcast. But and I know you weren't the first person to originate that idea, but my mind is still blown a little bit from that. So I'm reeling from that bit of news right here on the podcast. Kind of a balance there. Lews Therin came in to patch the bore with pride, and here we see Rand al'Thor. He goes in to create the new bore with sacrifice and humility and just a total giving, knowing I'm going to die. So you put everything into it. And two very different ways of doing it, two very different results. And one is, here's what I'm going to do, and the other kind of falls into, okay, I'm going to follow the light and do what the light commands. The way that Saidin and Saidar has been used, as we talked about before with the weaves, where they weave in different elements, again, spirit, earth, fire, air. I wonder how much of that is the nature of Saidin and Saidar, and how much of it is the way people think about it. They saw those as the 5 elements of the world, so when they shaped Saidin and Saidar, that was kind of the thought patterns, the ways of trying to weave it in order to accomplish your goal. And it's almost as though Rand, he transcends that, especially in the end. It literally says that, he's no longer weaving these different separate elements. That if someone came in with an entirely different mindset, they didn't think of the separate elements. Maybe someone with modern day ways we think of things, where we have all the different understanding of atomic structure and things like that. Maybe we would think of it entirely differently. That if we had Saidin and Saidar, we would shape it very, very differently than they do. We wouldn't have the same type weaves to accomplish the same things. So I wonder how much of that is the nature of Saidin and Saidar, the one power, and how much of it is just the way a person has to think in order to shape it. Nynaeve, she was healing people with it before she even knew there were weaves and power, which kind of leads me into the next thing. And there's been so much controversy over this, and everybody's going to have a different opinion, so I'm going to offer mine too. In the end, with the pipe, Rand, who's in Moridin's body, he sneaks out of the tent during the funeral that's going on for his old body. And he leaves and gets so far away and realizes, well, I don't have anything to light my pipe with, and he can't use Saidin or Saidar. The one power is shut off from that. He cannot use the true source because, I guess, simply because the dark one has been sealed away completely. There's no longer access to that. So he thinks about the pipe being lit, and it lights. And I've got kind of a entirely different take from what I've read from most people on that. I think that's because it's a new age beginning. If in the history that's given, of course, there's the ancient age, which we're in right now, that they know nothing about, where we don't have access to Saidin and Saidar. Then you have the age of legends, that second age. There is Saidin and Saidar, and you have different people wielding the one power, and that ends until, of course, people try to access the true power. They drill a hole in the bore, and we know how that turns out. It ends that age. The third age, you still have Saidin and Saidar, but the male half is tainted. They can't use it. There are people who can use the true source or the true power, who are accessing that. So you have changes every time in the power in each age and how it's used. One age there is none. Second half, you have the male and female halves. It's in balance. It's being used the way it's kind of designed. I'm putting air quotes around that to be used. The third age, it's off balance, and there's another power source there. So perhaps in the fourth age, the one after that, you still have side in the side R, because that's basically the grease that keeps the axle moving on the wheel of time itself. That's kind of the foundation of it. But the way it's used is completely different. Perhaps it is no more male half, female half, weaves, shaping things a certain way, but a totally different way of accessing magic. It's still there, or there's another source of power there at this point, and it's accessed in a completely different way. And so the old ways will kind of fade away, and the tower and everything will fade away, the Aes Sedai, and you'll have something completely different in the upcoming fourth age. You could imagine a world where in every age, and of course it keeps repeating around and around, either there is no access to it, or the access changes. The way you use magic changes in each age, each of the 7 ages of the turning of the wheel.
I've never read that take or heard it. I really like that. I had assumed it was something like wielding just the pattern, which it seems like he's been able to do. His Taviran-ness is so strong. That's the one I've seen and heard the most often, I think, that made sense to me.
Yeah, I've read that one too, and I kind of like it in a way, but in another way, it seems like, and I can't put my finger on it right now, but Mat or Perrin one were saying they could think of each other without the colors and all this stuff. It's kind of like the Taviran-ness was gone.
Right, because his dragonness should be gone too. Like, there's no need for that anymore. So I wonder too if maybe since you said there may be some other type of power or some other way to access it, I mean, can we assume, since the Dark One and the Creator seem to be equal and opposite types of forces, that there's an equivalent of the true power from the Creator, like essence of the Creator, yes, that since Rand was sort of his avatar, he's now able to wield, and maybe that's part of what he has done some of the time before. Right. But
wow, I didn't quite word it that way. Yeah, I like that thought. I like the total separate balance, where the one power is kind of neutral, and you have the true power, and then this whatever, creator power.
So if we think about this concept of balance, where Moiraine said, okay, in the last age, the kind of threshold between ages was a breaking, that this threshold, we're going to try to have peace. That's why she kept advocating for, y'all have to sign this dragon's peace. Maybe here, since the Dark One had been sealed up mostly in the third age, but still able to kind of wiggle through and touch the world to some extent, maybe we now have the Creator doing that in the fourth age, when the Creator had not really been intervening, it seemed like, before. We don't know as much about the kind of metaphysics of the Creator as we do about the Dark One, which I find interesting.
Exactly. Yeah, he's people talk about him, but they don't directly worship him. There's no, and until this very end, there's no access to him or anything. It's kind of, you kind of get the feeling like he created things and he's standing back watching, and you're on your own. Yet, I mean, if you're a person of faith, you could kind of see him working in the background without ever announcing himself. Well, until this one time. Anyway, that's one thought. I know some other people have said, well, at this point, Rand is the Creator, and I don't really like that one personally. But, everybody can have a different point of view, and I guess they're all equally right at this point, because...
there's no way to know. This is not one that Brandon can ever reveal. It's not in any notes. This is one Robert Jordan took to his grave, so... Yeah,
and it's almost like Jordan put that out there because he wanted to leave it with a mystery that he hadn't even fully fleshed out. He just put it out there, let y'all fight over it, and it was in his original notes with the thing with the pipe, and... Brandon left it in the story, and he didn't have an answer for it. There is not an answer. But I kind of like ours. I think it's even though we've fleshed it out right here in this discussion, I think it's better than most other theories, and especially since it's my idea.
Right? I see that mixture of humility and self-effacingness of the dragon there. Good job.
Yes. No wonder we admire Rand so much.
I really enjoy that there's such a mystery there at the end. Speaking of the mysteries at the end, one of the things that's been cleared up recently, and I know you and I have both read this, and probably all of our listeners have at this point too, but Brandon answering a question on Reddit about kind of the metaphysics of the Mord and Rand body swap. The takeaway I got from that was the part where he said that he must have gotten from some notes, or maybe Harriet's explanation or something, was that the soul that wanted to live found the body that was surviving, and the soul that wanted to be obliterated, kind of went with the body that was dying. And he drew back to the balefire streams crossing in, I think it was Crown of Swords, that seemed to link them. It's almost like those two souls were both inhabiting both of the bodies, like maybe a little bit out of phase or something. There was some linkage there where the souls could sort of cross over to different bodies, and that it seems like they did. So I actually think we've got as well as we can know, it seems like as a fandom we know the metaphysics of the body swap now. What I want to know is who else knows about this, and what's going to happen next? What would happen in a fourth age? What are Rand's next steps going to be? Who are the people he's going to still interact with?
Right. Yeah, because you kind of expect for Elaine, Min, and Avienda to go after him at some point because they can still feel his presence. That's why they weren't upset at the death and all of that. They knew he was still alive. Although it would be weird to still be in love with the person you knew and know who they are, have this connection with them through the water bond, and yet they're in a different body. Here's a body you've never kissed before, and all this. So that's, you got all the kind of weirdness and awkwardness there. Elaine is going to be very busy, of course, as the ruler of a major kingdom. So you don't know at what point in time. But I'm like you. I wish that could be explored. I wish we could know more about that.
Yeah, I think that it's funny that you mentioned how weird it must be for the three wives, because it's almost like they're having to deal with the realities of maybe just aging, of somebody changing and not being at all like the person you married anymore, but just a whole lot faster.
Yes,
they're just having to deal with it. They're just having to deal with it in their 20s instead of decades down the road, little by little.
Sounds like the new Amerlin had some clue as to it. Who is, of course, we get the hint it's going to be Cadsuane, because she sees him sneak out, and she sees, and she said something about the eyes. She knew who he was when she looked into his eyes. So, it didn't explicitly say that, but you got hints there. And she said it's something about his eyes, so she knew.
So I wonder if Moiraine knows, because she publicly kind of mourns at the funeral. But I don't know that I have any evidence one way or the other. Yeah.
Tam certainly does not. He's breaking down at the death of his son and being very strong about it. He carries the torch for the funeral pyre. My first time through, I'm like, that put too nice a bow on it. I would rather he died as to go on like this, because I didn't get the why. After hearing a lot of the discussions and of course Sanderson revealing about the balefire touching, and how the balefire is actually kind of an outpouring from the soul, that what caused the souls to kind of be connected from that point on. It made a little more sense, so I can live with it easier now. For a while I just didn't like that ending, but I can live with it a lot better now that I've got an explanation, because the story didn't really give us an explanation. It gave us the clues, but we didn't put them together. Another interesting balefire moment. It gets thrown around a lot earlier in the book, and when Rand doesn't know what it is, and then even when he does, that it's forbidden, but he's still going to use it. Go back to the Eye of the World in the prologue. Lews Therin, who of course comes to himself, realizes what's happened. He goes to this place where nobody's around him, and kills himself, basically, creating Dragonmouth at the same time. And I've heard people talk about how it's just this column of fire or whatever, or he created a mountain. In my mind, from the time I first came across balefire and they talked about what it was, that's what I assumed he used. And even though balefire is supposed to kind of be cast out from the soul, maybe you can draw it. I don't know. But in my mind, I always thought he brings down this column of balefire with all the power he can summon. And it seemed like he may have even used a Terangrial, or had a Terangrial ring or something. I'd have to go back and reread it to pick up that finer detail. But all the power he could hold where he's about to burn himself out in a column of balefire, which of course goes down through the crust of the earth, and you get volcanic activity, which creates Dragonmouth. But I wondered if it was Belfire, I may be totally wrong, but if it were, was that an effort to undo what he had done in killing his family? Because, the more powerful the Belfire.
Yeah.
But it had been too long. He couldn't, or maybe he did go back enough, because now that I think about it, I don't remember anybody else referring to him as Kinslayer after that.
I feel like
I
don't know. I feel
way,
like that name has got to come up again.
Yeah.
I know Eli Morin calls him that there,
Yes.
but I feel like that has come up in the stories later too.
And it may have, but at least maybe it was an effort, and he couldn't
go back that far into the pattern.
I don't
Yeah,
know, my thoughts. But then with Sanderson talking about how Belfire is cast out from the spirit, maybe you can't call it down on top of yourself. I don't know. I may be completely wrong, because it described it coming down from the sky.
It did. Yeah, that visual description of it. The visual description itself is part of what has led some people to think it was balefire. I've heard other podcasters talk about this too, that it's just this bar of very bright light, and so.
Right.
But I think one of the description pieces that's missing, that I've seen all the other times that I can remember reading about balefire, what's normally there is that the target that gets consumed by the balefire kind of goes into negative, like photo-negative colors for a moment, and then kind of breaks up into these little dust mote type things.
Oh, yeah, you're right. I had forgotten that, because I always pictured that like in the old Star Trek when someone got shot with a phaser.
Yeah.
You'd see them, the image kind of go negative, and it just disappears. Exactly.
I bet that's what he had in mind when he wrote it.
Very well may have, because that is the description of it. You just got to see all the atoms that glow, and then they just break loose, and everything's gone. And then,
and I don't think we see that in the prologue. I don't think we see that kind of negative, photo-negative description until about the Dragon Reborn, when we start seeing balefire thrown around a lot.
Yeah, I had not thought of that detail. It's just one of those things. To me, it wasn't just an effort to kill himself; it was an effort to try to bring his family back. But
yeah, it makes sense that that's what somebody would reach for in a moment of despair like that.
But then again, I guess to play Forsaken's advocate with that idea, when someone is burnt out of the pattern with balefire, they can't be reborn, can they?
I forget how this goes. I've assumed sometimes that it means that they can't.
It'll be a homework project, because it seems like there were some of the Forsaken that were killed that way.
Please fact check us, listeners. Right. Yeah.
Yes. So anyway, that's just random thoughts. So if that's the case, then it was not balefire. He created just a column of fire, whatever that still did a similar thing in burning down into the crust of the earth, causing the volcanic activity. But I don't know. In my mind, I just wanted it to be balefire, that he was trying to undo his family's death, even by destroying himself. So
yeah,
I don't know. One way or another, he did it, and set in motion this huge chain of events that ends up with the Dark One sealed away once again for all final, until another turning of the wheel.
Yeah, until somebody, Lanfear 2.0, drills into it again, I guess.
Yes. I hope all of you listeners will continue to stick with us as we get ready. We have one more episode here in season 1. We're going to have a bonus episode where we discover some world building, both in the Wheel of Time and in other books, just different ideas, talking about that. As well, we'll also have a bit of a introduction, which we failed to do with our first beginning of our series. Tell you a little bit about ourselves, so you've gotten hints of that along the way.
You can find us on Podbean, Stitcher, Google Play Podcasts, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. Follow me on Twitter at Lajarasedai, Lajarasedai, or subscribe to our YouTube channel, Lajara Dane. Tell them bye, Giskel.
Bye, Giskel.